all of our channels activated so that we can bring our audience into our conversation.
So we're live, pre-live, basically.
We're pre-live live,
okay.
But we are, we are live. Is
that such a thing, pre-live live?
Clearly it is.
Okay.
So we are here today doing another edition of Clothing Brief.
Our second edition.
This is...
and you've warned me to keep it brief, so it's not clothing long
Johns.
Out. Yeah,
it's
right.
clothing brief. That's right. So this is under our clothing culture umbrella, our media division. And in Clothing Brief, we are bringing our audience the hot trending topics in the news in the fashion and apparel industry. And we've got some exciting things to share with everybody today. Let's bring up our very first topic. We're going to talk a little luxury, a little fashion today. Gucci has been in the news.
Gucci's always in the news, isn't it? Doesn't it seem like for years and years it's always got something? Or in the movies, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Although I'm not sure they love the topic that's trending in the news right now. They reported a pretty significant sales drop in Q4 of 2024 by the percent of 24%.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy.
That is staggering.
Yeah.
But is this an indicator of an overall trend that's happening in the luxury market, or is this something that's very specific to Gucci?
The overall luxury market is down 2 to 3%. So it's certainly not as dramatic as what we're seeing at Gucci. What we're seeing there, I think, is really kind of what I always talk about, evolution, not revolution. When revolution occurs, it's a little bloody. Sabato De Sarno has left as creative director there. He was only there for about 2 years.
Right.
As with all people in positions of responsibility, they make decisions. Decisions have ramifications. And, he wanted to pull back from e-commerce a little bit. He had his own opinions about how retail is to be run. And I don't think the consumer followed him in that direction.
Okay.
So I think that's really what's happening at Gucci. There are always, it's so interesting in luxury brands that at any one given time, only a third are really seeing kind of growth or success. There's a lot of them, and it really is what's hot at the moment where those different changes are. But in this case, it's definitely, there's a lot of radical shifts as opposed to kind of paced methodical decisions, I think.
Wow. Okay. So lessons learned. This is one that we've talked about a lot of times in many of our conversations. Evolution, not revolution.
Right.
And pay attention to what your customers are telling you.
Yeah.
Customers responded in a big way.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
We're in a consumer-driven economy.
That's right. Yeah. So another trending story in the news lines that I think is really fascinating is on the sustainability side of things.
Can you still say that in the U.S.?
Well, we are in a global market.
Yeah.
So the Saudi Fashion Commission launched the Future of Sustainability initiative aimed at promoting fashion recycling across retail spaces in Saudi Arabia. I think this is really, really fascinating for a country that is has great wealth, that they even recognize that this is an important initiative. Can you share a little highlight on this?
Well, Saudi also makes a lot of sense that they're looking at sustainable initiatives. They're a pretty arid country or conglomerate or a kingdom. And you really have to make sure that all these resources are, properly protected. This is mainly focusing on apparel, these initiatives that are going on, where they're talking about upcycling, recycling, putting bins in malls, even an interesting, very cultural viewpoint is that the khans that people wear to Hajj all the time, they're basically white, rectangular, 2 pieces of white rectangular cloth, and there's a special way that you fold it and wrap it for the bottom and then a wrap for the top, and they go on pilgrimage there. There's about 1.9 million people every year that go to Hajj on pilgrimage, and they're looking at how do we take the kharajs and recycle them or upcycle them or reutilize that fabric. So, the world understanding that we've got to be thinking about all these aspects. And while America, for the short term, I would imagine, is kind of ducking sustainability in favor of, corporate growth, then, everyone else is kind of coming to the table and understanding that's an important topic.
And what you're referring to with the United States is more driven by the administration, less by the consumer. Consumer consciousness is growing, and that's one of the things that I really like about what the Saudi Fashion Commission is doing, because by placing these bins all throughout retail centers and malls, you are raising that consumer
awareness
consciousness,
and understanding it. Yeah,
creating a dialogue around it.
For sure.
Yeah. So, speaking of administration and their impact, there's ongoing conversations of this trade war. And, I don't anticipate this conversation dropping anytime soon, but I want us to focus in on one specific area, the logistics side of things. We are seeing congestion at the imports within our import with customs as a direct impact of the trade wars. Let's talk about what's happening there.
Well, you can understand with the uncertainty that's going on, the current administration, doesn't really matter what side of the political fence you're on. There's certain processes and how to roll out different plans. And there are definitely two sides to this story about tariffs and balance of trade and fairness in trade. And I respect all of those viewpoints. But when you're rolling out tariffs in general, you want to give some advance warning. You want to talk about a path and procedure. That's not happening. There's just kind of like immediately there's a tariff thrown on, creates a lot of anxiety in the marketplace. It's certainly impacting consumers and their pocketbooks. It's certainly impacting small, medium business in terms of imports and large business, I would say. And with all of that instability happening, things are happening where people are ramping up inventories because they don't know what's happening next, hoping to beat the next surprise tariff arm wrestling match. And that pushes more goods into our ports. It puts more goods on boats and more boats coming into ports. And, we have a limited resource, CDP, Customs Border Protection. They've been already stressed in terms of manpower. And, we're not really sure what's happening with that respect in terms of staff sizes and everything going on with the quote streamlining of government. But that's going to certainly create more problems because you've got more goods coming in, less resources to manage those goods and collect these tariffs and or taxes. And so that's going to create and is creating congestion at the ports.
Yeah, so this kind of rush of goods into the United States. We also had a moment where you had de minimis on and off again. It's like, of course, when you remove de minimis, which there are a lot of advocates for, because that is fostering advantages to fast fashion companies.
Foreign fashion companies, the expense of U.S. fast fashion companies.
Correct. But of course, when you remove de minimis, all of a sudden now
you got 1 billion packages that come in under de minimis every year that now have to be cataloged and taxed and tariffed, and there's no resource for that.
1 billion a year and 1 million of those a day is fast fashion. Isn't that exactly staggering?
Right.
Yes, that's right. Are there any legal or illegal strategies that companies are trying to employ to, overcome some of these new tariff
challenges? Yeah, whenever things like this happen, both of those things can occur. Legal changes are the kind of movement of production centers around the world. China is the largest exporter of apparel to the U.S. It's declining, of course, with some of these things, but you've got all these other places that produce garments. That does not mean that the fabric, the textile, the trims, the sewing thread, the poly bags, the boxes, all of those related materials can't be made in China and then shipped to another country. So that is legal. If you take full fabrics and all that, you containerize them, you ship them to a factory, let's say in Cambodia, and your cut, make, and assembly and packing, all that occurs in Cambodia. The country of origin is Cambodia. So Cambodia is not currently under additional tariffs. We've always had tariffs in the form of duties on imports based upon classification, but they don't have penalty tariffs. So that's the legal aspect. There are rising concerns and rising conversations about people trying to skirt this issue by having the entire goods made in China, and then labeled made in Cambodia, shipped in, basically backdoored into the country and then moved out. That occurred years and years ago when I first started in the business, when we had things that were called quotas. There was only a certain amount of goods that could be shipped from a particular country in a given calendar year. And when quotas filled up, some countries that you really didn't even imagine had that much production would all of a sudden start shipping stuff because they had plenty of quotas to ship. And there was this kind of, discovery that goods were still being made in these manufacturing countries that quotas were full in, and they were just transshipping, that's the term, transshipping to other countries and exporting out of those. So, all these things can occur when all of a sudden there's instability introduced into the market. People are worried about profitability. They've got, things that they're working on, and people are going to find different ways. When tariffs hit, the legal action on de minimis, which we just talked about, that's a legal situation where anything coming into the U.S. under $800 is duty and tariff free. A lot of Chinese export companies took great advantage of de minimis. And so there's a lot of different things that are occurring on that landscape.
Yeah, in this landscape, this has been something that's been on the horizon. We know that companies have been looking to migrate their production outside of China because we've known that some of these concerns have been on the horizon, and they're a target of this conversation. As a result, other countries are starting to pick up more of the production. And in the news headlines, we've seen that Sri Lanka is celebrating a great win on that side of things. Just in January of this year, 2025, they've reported a 22.7 increase of their apparel and textile exports. That's
certainly something to celebrate for Sri Lanka. They had a very, very hard go during COVID. A lot of factories struggled mightily. Their revenue, in 2024 is back. It was back around $5 billion. That's still down from pre-COVID levels. They were exporting about $6 billion. And the January increase of about $428 million, that was that 22.7% increase, makes perfect sense. As people are leaving China because of the increasing duties and tariffs, you got to go somewhere. The shocking number, of course, is out of the $903 billion worth of apparel exports kind of globally, $323 billion is still produced out of China. Globally. And so we're looking at Sri Lanka at $5 billion. That's not a lot of volume. It's 0.5% or something in terms of total export. But all countries are going to see these levels of increase as the U.S. specifically exits China more in terms of their apparel production. The astounding thing is if you take Bangladesh, Vietnam, Turkey, India, Indonesia, Cambodia, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, you combine them all together.
Countries, and all those countries are well positioned to take some of the production.
Their position, I'm not sure well is the answer, because if you add all of those percentages of export volume together, it equals about 25% in total export volume. That's exactly or around what China's exporting today. So as China's export volume, our percentage going to the U.S. reduces, the challenge now is that demand's going to exceed supply. So these other countries are setting up and being well positioned for increased volumes. The question is, like in Sri Lanka, there's 300 and some factories. How much more volume can they pick up? How can you build infrastructure quickly enough to manage more volume? Will that maintain? Do you want to invest that much infrastructure if China and U.S. kind of figure out a way to settle the differences and tariffs and penalty tariffs kind of go away, and then that kind of volume rebalances itself maybe back into China, because China does apparel really well. So there's a lot of these things going on, and I think that adds to the global chaos.
We've had a lot of conversations in a longer format on our podcast, Clothing Culture, about these very dynamics of if you are trying to shift your goods out out of a country such as China? How do you make that plan to diversify your production? It's not something that you can do overnight because these countries don't have the decades upon decades of infrastructure building that China's
And the
had.
manpower,
And the
right? Yeah.
skilled
Yeah.
labor is the other part
But
of
Sri
it.
Lanka's happy. I mean, 20% of their GDP is apparel exports, so they're happy to see an increase back. Hopefully, they'll get back to pre-COVID levels, and that would be great. It's a wonderful country,
It is.
beautiful country. We were just there recently, so it was fantastic.
Yeah. Well, those are real excellent insights. We do have podcast episodes available that have a deeper dive on trade wars, tariffs, planning and diversifying your production. So if you would like some help and guidance there, definitely take a look at our catalog. You can always reach out to us if you want to have deeper conversations and have questions on how to navigate these challenges that we're addressing.
And hopefully with the answers, depending on the day.
Oh, right. Ever changing, but we are keeping a watch on it, which is why we're doing clothing briefs to keep you up to date. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Clothing Culture so that you can stay apprised of upcoming episodes. Thank you for joining. Great. 10 minutes?